Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Sandra admired her reflection in the mirror, a tall, slender woman with luxurious hair. She hardly recognized herself. The black dress of classic style shone with a steely sheen, which only emphasized the dignity of her figure even more. Suddenly, a suspicious rustle was heard from behind, and then a whisper from Lily's eldest daughter. "Mommy is so beautiful, like a cartoon queen." Younger Lizzie said affirmatively. "Wow." The girls thought their mother couldn't see them, but the mirror revealed their hidden agenda. And peeking is not good. Sandra turned around abruptly and the daughters squealed with delight. "Mommy, we were trying to be quiet. We just really want to see it too." It's all Lizzie's fault. She's sniffing her nose so loud you can hear her 3 kilometers away. Sandra scooped up the girls and kissed each of them on the top of their sun-scented heads. "Lizzie's sniffling has nothing to do with it, because the mirror gave you away." The older girl walked over to the dresser and immediately clapped her hands together. "Oh, you can see everything, and we thought you wouldn't notice us." Suddenly, the little girl's voice faded. "Daddy's coming." After the sisters secretly entered the parents' bedroom, the door remained ajar. Therefore, no one noticed the appearance of the head of the family. Cameron tried to give his voice a cheerful note, but his face expressed dissatisfaction. "Who's distracting our mother? Go back to your room, you kittens." The girls looked at each other and ran out of the bedroom. Cameron didn't even throw them a funny joke, which sometimes happened when he was in a good mood. "Hello." Today the man had been depressed since morning, so even his daughters were irritating him. Sandra too was all tense, waiting for the verdict. In addition, Cameron took a few steps away and looked at his wife for a minute. It was so unbearable that the woman asked in a half-whisper, "Well, what do you say?" "Nothing good. Couldn't you have bought something more decent with the money I gave you?" "Cameron, the only thing I could have bought with that money was a warm robe. My parents gave it to me. I wonder why I'm finding out about this last one. I told you to keep me in the loop on everything, including financial matters. But it was my parents who decided to help me out. It doesn't matter. You don't live on an island. There, you could do whatever you wanted. But you have a family, which means you have responsibilities and duties." The uplifted mood immediately evaporated. Sandra cast a fleeting glance in the mirror and saw there a droopy woman with dull eyes. Cameron noticed the movement. Look at yourself. Don't look away. Now do you see why I'm always the only one attending important events? Even that shabby outfit you spent mad money on, look all. I won't say the number out loud, years old. Tears of resentment appeared in the woman's eyes. "Cameron, why are you making this spectacle here now? Go to your own corporate party if you're embarrassed of me. It's not like I asked to keep you company." The man jumped up to his wife, a changed look on his face. "You're still raising your voice? You should be blowing dust off me. I provide for all of you, feed you. This apartment, by the way, I also bought it. I got into terrible debt. And all for what? To make my wife turn her nose up at me." Cameron grabbed Sandra's makeup bag and dumped its contents on the dressing table. "This was all bought with my money too, so you better be quiet." He was about to head for the door, but then came back out again. "I'll give you half an hour to pack. Andrea and his wife will pick us up. And as for your reproach, I'm really ashamed of your appearance. Can't you see you look like a tortured codfish? I'd love to go to the party alone, but the chief has ordered all the staff to come with their soulmates. So my situation is, by your grace, a hopeless one." Pouring out his frustration on the unfortunate woman, Cameron said more calmly, "The dress you've chosen is really unfortunate, but it's too late to change anything. And I find your hair too inappropriate for your age. Why all the frivolous curls? I hope my shirt's not in this condition." "Cameron, you'll see for yourself. I prepared everything as usual." The husband went to tidy up the status quo. Sandra remained standing in front of the mirror. She wanted more than anything to tear off her dress and fall into the pillows, to let her tears flow, but there was some truth in Cameron's reproaches. She was indeed entirely dependent on him. After all, even for the necessary feminine trifles, her husband allocated her monthly funds. And after each trip to the store, she showed him the receipts. And this had been going on for almost 10 years. Line checkers were heard from behind again. The daughters clung to their mother as if to comfort her. And the eldest, Lily, whispered, "Mommy, don't believe Daddy. You are the most beautiful in the whole world, and he's scolding you on purpose because he's afraid. What is he afraid of? Don't you understand? What if while daddy's at work, the Tsarevich comes and takes you away with him? That's what happened in the story you read to Lizzie and me the other day. Sandra laughed. But I'm not Sleeping Beauty, and there are no princes or princesses among my acquaintances. And anyway, go to your room now, daddy will come and he'll swear at us again. This threat was followed by an instant reaction. The girls flew out of the room with cosmic speed. Left alone, Sandra adjusted her makeup. She took another critical look at herself in the mirror. Fuck that hairstyle. It's a mess on my head. In a minute, there was no trace of the curl design. The woman ran a comb through her long hair and then braided the strands into a beautiful herringbone and laid the braid on the side. That really is better. The woman, for the first time in just one day, caught herself thinking that agreeing with her husband in everything had become a tradition for her. She was used to obediently following his orders, used to his perpetual displeasure. It had gotten to the point where she was afraid to move at night to avoid waking Cameron. But the worst was that her husband takes such servile behavior as a norm. And not so long ago, things had been different. How could she not have noticed her transformation into a slave? This was not the first time this question had arisen for Sandra. After all, 10 years in the scale of one human life is a long time. But it so happened that Cameron has imperceptibly become for her not only the main person, but also the ruler of her fate. Unfortunately, she realized it too late. And now she has to bear all the insults and humiliations without complaint. But all this she is willing to endure only because there is hope that one day she will again see that kind Cameron, who for her was from childhood the standard of a real man. Sandra was too young to remember the details of their first meeting, but Millie Rose loved to tell how her 3-year-old daughter had declared in a loud voice when your group brought in the new boy, "This is my friend." To assert this right, the little girl squeezed the baby's palm tightly and led him to the part of the room where there was a play corner. The pupils of the younger group fell silent, and the adult witnesses of this touching scene smiled. But no one objected to this division of roles. Then Sandra was not characterized by a soft character, and any aggression on the part of her peers responded sharply. And her methods of fighting with opponents allowed the use of brute physical force. Therefore, Millie Rose often had to blush because of the unworthy behavior of a small bandit. Charles Rose, about the pranks of his Harris, proudly stated, "We got a streak. We have such a family name. So in the family we have no Slovako." Millie Rose always said to such praise, "Next time you'll go after your daughter. I'm not the only one who has to take the blame for her bad upbringing." The man was genuinely indignant. "Who dares to say such a thing is a fool? That's what you'll tell the teacher personally, because she thinks that you and I are failing in our parenting duties." Charles Rose rushed to stand up for justice, but his optimism didn't last long. Literally a week later, righteous fervor faded and loving father found any excuse not to cross the threshold of the kindergarten. However, since the advent of Under the Chief in the face of Fatty Cameron, Sandra a little changed for the better. The same teacher, who not so long ago criticized the girl's behavior, now at every turn praised her. "Sandra is an angel. Cameron is clumsy and not everything the kid does well. And she tries to help him in everything. And such tutelage, gives its fruits." The boy tries to imitate his girlfriend. Sandra, and in his school years, was for Cameron either a beacon or a guiding star. If he did something on his own, he always looked back at Sandra. The boy needed her support like air. But Cameron himself also tried to respond in the same coin. Back in the 3rd grade, the guy showed his wrestling character when he was not afraid of the guys who were 2 years older. 5th graders decided to shake their fellow younger age, and as a victim they chose girls. Cameron stumbled upon the humiliating scene by accident. 3 girls from the class, surrounded by immature racketeers, were desperately crying. "Boys, we really don't have any money. We spend it all in the cafeteria." One bigger boy spat through his teeth. "What if we shook it like a branch?" The girls cried even louder, but those tears made the extortionists even more angry. One of them grabbed the smallest girl by the hood of her jacket. Cameron, without thinking of the consequences, grabbed some stick and together with it went to ram the enemy with a shout, "You assholes, let the girls go." The hooligans obviously did not expect such a turn of events and rushed away. The rescued classmates later told everyone about Cameron's courage, and the young hero was embarrassed by the unexpectedly fell on him popularity. But his moment of fame was short-lived. When the novice bandits realized that screwed up in front of the third grader, they decided to that cruel revenge. And the next day, after the landmark rescue of girls under the eye of yesterday's hero was a huge black eye. The rescued girls sighed and rolled their eyes prettily. "Cameron, we got you in trouble. Now you can cheat off my math homework for the whole quarter." A second classmate wanted to get him into a ballroom dance class, but Cameron delicately declined all help and proudly said, "Bruises are nothing. Scars adorn the face of a real man." But the popularity of Cameron did not like Sandra. When his classmates started circling him like flies, she seriously warned them, "Stone is my friend. We've been friends since kindergarten, and just because Cameron protected you doesn't mean he's going to hang out with you." The classmates didn't need to be told twice and quickly refocused their attention on another object. But Cameron had already gotten a taste of popularity and was angered by Sandra's interference. "Rose, why are you meddling where you're not asked? Maybe I don't want to be friends with you anymore." This statement annoyed, but did not scare Sandra. The girl stopped paying attention to Cameron and he had no access to her notebooks. Of course, he could move to another desk and many girls would be happy to have such a neighborhood, but something told him that he should not make public the spoiled relationship with Sandra. The tense situation resolved itself. All the holidays at school were celebrated brightly, but with the involvement of their own talents. When the program of the event for Defender of the Fatherland Day was drawn up, all that was left was to find worthy presenters. At the Pedagogical Council discussed different candidates, but the principal herself unexpectedly suggested, "What are we puzzling over here?" In the third A, there is a beautiful couple, Sandra and Cameron. One of the teachers objected. "They're very young." And that's great. Kids are always viewed positively, even if they make mistakes. This common cause brought the friends together again. They did an excellent job, and many said that it was the presenters who were the highlight of the concert program. Sandra was in the crossfire of glances for the first time, and Cameron already knew the taste of fame. Then after the concert, he suddenly realized that Sandra could be the bridge from which he could jump more than once. This discovery both shocked and pleased the ambitious boy. He held out his hand to his girlfriend, Sandra. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I said some nonsense to you." The girl was embarrassed. She did not expect such words. It was out of his character. "Oh, come on now, Cameron. I'm not mad." She smiled openly and immediately realized how much she missed their interactions. "Friendship forever then?" Sandra laughed with joy overflowing her soul and Cameron chimed in. "Friendship is strong. It won't break." Her friend picked up on it in a thin voice. "It won't break through the rains and blizzards." They selflessly sang the popular children's song, holding hands and looking into each other's eyes. And at that moment, they sincerely believed that no one and nothing could break their friendship. About how the world seems very different when you're young. This is a well-known fact. Sandra and Cameron were convinced that they should only step on the broad road to adulthood, and they will walk on it easily and confidently. Although both on the excellent certificate did not pull, but the chances of entering a good university were high. At that time in the country, there was a demand for lawyers, economists, and a couple decided to apply directly to the Capital University. Sandra had some last-minute doubts. "Cameron, aren't you and I a little overconfident? After all, this is not something, but a very serious educational institution. Courage conquers cities. Remember that proverb?" The girl realized that Cameron was encouraging them. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she agreed with him, but the doubts were growing. "I remember, but something doesn't make me feel at ease." "What's with the sluggish mood?" "Sandra, I don't recognize you. You were always brave, weren't you?" "That was before, at my home school. It's all the same. This is Chicago. Why don't you and I find something a little more modest? There are plenty of good schools all over the country." Cameron got serious. "I'll try to prove to you the evil truth of life on my fingers. Indeed, there are many institutes in our beautiful country, but only the capital's universities have an impeccable reputation. Even if your diploma is full of C's with a rare speck of Thursday, the mere fact of graduating from an institute in Chicago will be a huge advantage when applying for your first job. I probably don't need to tell you that career advancement is directly related to where you start. Sandra looked at the guy as if she was seeing him for the first time. They had interacted so much, knew so much about each other. Sandra understood that Cameron wanted to accomplish something, but for him to have such emphatic, pragmatic thoughts, she hadn't realized. He even seemed distant, unfamiliar to her now. Cameron, you have such a strange way of thinking. I even get the impression you're repeating someone else's words. I don't deny it. There's a point, but I don't see anything wrong with it. Look, you and we both come from average families. Our parents are positive people, real hard workers. What's wrong with that? My father has a wall full of certificates of honor. What do we do with these props? What do we do with them? What use is it? Cameron, you're not making any sense right now. You think that because you've been raised with outdated stereotypes. But life changes, and today we have different priorities because enthusiasm alone will not get us far. My father realized this a long time ago, but he didn't have time to readjust. It was him who laid out the rules of life for me. From the beginning, as the great poet said, one should aim oneself at achieving the main goal from a young age. Of course, at first it may seem unattainable, but if you set the right accents, everything will work out. You surprise me, and I've never looked that far. It always seemed to me that it is necessary, as in a computer game, to pass from one level to another. In principle, you are correct in your reasoning, but the main goal should be set right away, using your comparison as a target. Cameron looked at her with eyes that Sandra realized her arguments will not be heard, but still tried. Wait, Cameron, what if we don't get in? I'll definitely get in. I'm sure of it. If I can't get in on a budget, I'll go to a tuition-free program. That's a lot of money. My parents don't have that kind of money. She didn't understand how Cameron could say that. It was like she was a stranger and an outsider to him. No way. She must have imagined it or misunderstood. Turns out she got it right. I can't help you there. As they say, to each his own. By the time he left school, Cameron's selfishness was evident in the smallest things. One day, Rose was careful to point this out to her daughter. Sandra, I don't like to meddle in other people's affairs, but I don't like the fact that Cameron is taking advantage of you. Don't you see that? Mom, you're imagining it. We're on good terms. He helps me with a lot of things too. I don't see it. I don't see it. God be with you. They left town together. As is customary in such cases, parents gave a farewell. And the fledglings believed that at the first time they would conquer not only the capital, but the whole world. But Sandra immediately flew. She did not have enough points to get on the budget. And Cameron was jubilant because he passed the competition. Sandra cried all day from resentment, but she didn't want to go back to her town. One girl with whom they lived together in the dormitory advised, "Many people after the first run find themselves in the gap. It's normal. Now the main thing is not to miss a year. You can find out where you did not get enough to learn some other useful profession." This option interested Sandra, and she went together with her neighbor to look for an educational institution. For a whole day, they passed more than a dozen colleges and colleges, but everything was already packed to the brim and only one college of food industry had a few free places. But the girls, tired from their search, were satisfied with the result. Sandra thought that Cameron would be happy when he found out that she would be studying in the capital after all. The girl decided to tell him this happy news over the phone, but her friend's answer knocked her down. "You realize that college is a judgment. Now everyone will look at you as inferior. It would be better if you went home, and next year you could try again." Sandra tried to change her friend's mind, but he firmly believed in his rightness. The girl called him several times, hoping to meet him, but Cameron each time found 100 excuses so that the date did not take place. May, the girl they went to college with, remarked, "Looks like your date is embarrassed of you." "He's my friend. We didn't do anything like that." "And too bad. Whatever they say, guys like consistency. Yeah, they can have an affair with your girlfriend on the side, but God forbid they get what they used to think was theirs stolen from under their noses." "Are you implying something?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you straight up. Make your Cameron worry. You're an attractive girl. You can have a boyfriend. May, do you think that's gonna work? May, I'm sure your friend will come running. How do I put this plan into action?" "It's very simple." May's method was simple, but most importantly, it didn't require anything. The executor was quickly found too. Sandra was being courted by a guy who was nearing the end of his studies. Scott was a fan of cooking and dreamed of having his own restaurant. He was jokingly called the cook's book in college because he knew thousands of recipes and fascinatingly told about the national features of cuisines of different countries of the world. Scott invited Sandra to a cafe a couple of times, and she from boredom agreed to keep him company on the advice of her neighbor. The girl began to give the guy signs of attention, and soon he already followed her like a needle. On the first holiday of spring, Sandra came to visit her parents with Scott. The young man immediately took a liking to his parents. Rose was impressed by his knowledge of cooking. The mother enthusiastically whispered to her daughter, so as not to hear the guest, "Sandra, this guy is a real treasure. He's a treasure. Don't let him get away, so you don't have to bite your elbows later." "Mom, Scott's just a good friend of mine. What is it with you people and making plans for the future?" "It's okay, because all parents worry about their kids and wish them well. You already had a best friend, but he hasn't been around lately. He's probably embarrassed to be friends with a girl who's studying to be a chef, because today bankers rule the roost." Rose talked about Cameron, mentioning his name, which showed her strong resentment towards her daughter's former classmate. Sandra was amazed at how good a judge of character her mother was, but in remembrance of an old friendship, she still stood up for the one she was always thinking about. "Mom, you say yourself that you can't just judge a person. Cameron has a goal and he's on his way to it. Freshman year at any school is the most difficult period. I'll admit that even I have problems, even though I'm in college. But in the summer, if everything works out well, I'll go back to university. And this is the right decision. Here I support you in everything." The holidays flew by like 1 minute and the guests had to return to the capital, but May's plan worked 100%. Literally the next evening after returning to the capital, there was a knock at the room where Sandra and her friend lived. When the girl opened the door, she was stunned by surprise. In front of her with a confused smile stood Cameron. "Hello." The guy pulled out a huge bouquet of flowers from some unknown secret place. "I'm sorry I'm late, but I want to wish you a happy spring festival. I couldn't get here sooner. You probably weren't expecting me." "You were right. I haven't been expecting you for a long time." Yeah, what's an old friend for when there's so many suitors around?" "Yeah, I heard you got a boyfriend. Is it serious?" Sandra's soul was ringing with joy. She had no idea that May's plans would bear fruit so quickly. "Since when did you become interested in my life?" "Sandra, can I come in? It's a bit awkward talking in the doorway." "Sandra." "Yes, of course, I'm sorry, but your visit is so unexpected that I was confused." "And about the old friendship. It was you who stopped answering my calls, and since I don't have a monastic vow, I have every right to go on a date." "Cameron, but you're the one who told me to go for it." "That's right, but I think your only goal right now is our family. I want my house to be warm and cozy, to have children's laughter in it. And what will we live on? Let now our parents help us a lot, but they will not be forever pulling from the last strength. I'm not going to put such a burden on their shoulders. I only have 2 years of schooling left, and then I promise that I will do everything I can to provide for my family." Sandra listened to her husband's optimistic plans and suddenly asked, "Cameron, tell me honestly, why did you marry me?" This conversation took place during breakfast and the man almost choked on a sandwich with sausage and cheese. "Sandra, you can't ask stupid questions while you're eating." "Sandra, it's a bad habit most women have. But I'll tell you this, I didn't even consider another candidate for a wife. You and I know each other well, which is good for our marriage. Besides, you're a great hostess and a great cook. In a word, I have complete confidence in you." "Cameron, what about love? Did you marry me for pragmatic reasons?" Sandra was stunned by her husband's revelation. She had expected to hear from him completely different words, but he did not see fit to say them, even for the sake of propriety. The young woman felt humiliated. She wanted to say something to her husband, but Cameron caught her mood and beat her to it. "Love is a beautiful word, of course, and I understand what a storm is raging in your sensitive heart, but life is a harsh thing. You can't go far on love alone. For me, it's more important the material side in everyday life. And lyrics, that's a secondary matter. So you didn't marry me for love, but out of convenience?" Cameron looked at his wife the way one looks at a hopelessly ill person. Yes, what's wrong with that? I'm comfortable with you, and I plan to live my life that way. And thanks for the delicious breakfast. Her husband never answered the main question, but Sandra didn't dare to ask it anymore because she knew the answer. That day, she realized how right her mother had been. Everything inside her protested, and the voice of reason shouted, "Leave him now, or it will be too late." "Where is your prize, Sandra?" The young woman did not heed this call and stayed. It was her first sacrifice, made on the altar of, as she thought, marital happiness. Cameron was a subtle psychologist and immediately realized that he had won the first victory. Every day thereafter, he methodically suppressed his wife's own self. His dictate was well thought out and from the outside resembled the care of a beloved woman. Another advantageous quality possessed Cameron. He always acted proactively, not giving his wife a chance to recollect. Just a year of living together, Sandra turned into an obedient servant of her husband. She fulfilled his every whim at the first request. When Cameron learned that they would have a child, he began to control her every move. Therefore, Sandra had to leave the university after 2 years of study. Subsequently, she left in work, which gave her at least a small opportunity to realize herself. The only consolation for the young woman became children. A year and a half after the birth of Lily, Sandra became pregnant again. This period was the happiest in her life because Cameron weakened control and she could afford small weaknesses. Her husband simply adored his daughters and made plans for the future. "We're not gonna stop there. You still have to give me a son." Sandra tried to joke. "Cameron, come down to earth. We are already cramped in this rented apartment, and you are already planning a third child. Don't worry, wife. Very soon our living conditions will improve." Sandra knew that her husband was not used to throwing words into the wind and waited patiently. She did not pester him with questions because for several years of life together learned that unnecessary curiosity only makes her husband angry, and she did not want to burst into scandal. One day, husband came from work in an elevated mood. He picked up his eldest daughter who ran up to him. "Yes, of course it's my own fault, but you realize that the life of a student." The girl interrupted the guest. "Cameron, I understand everything. It's hard for you. You sleep 3 to 4 hours, you have a goal, but you forgot one little thing. I'm a student too. Yes, the profession I'm learning is not so prestigious, but if there are no cooks, bankers and other professions will have a hard time." The young man looked at Sandra as if he was seeing her for the first time. The girl noticed how he blushed to the roots of his hair, so she realized that her suspicion was not groundless and Cameron was really shy of her society. But the fear of losing such a convenient and fail-safe defense still overpowered ambition. But soon there was another reason that forced Cameron to protect his friend from outside influence. The guy was pleasantly surprised to learn that in a few months Sandra learned to cook. One day the girl, along with her friend, asked to visit Cameron. He agreed but warned, "You just do not fall, but we have everything Spartan." May couldn't help herself as she stepped into the room. "This isn't a room to live in, it's a den. So outsiders are asked to leave, and Sandra and I will try to make everything look more or less decent." Not even 2 hours later, the tenants looked around apprehensively, not believing that they were in their room, but even more surprised when the temporary hostesses invited them to the table, in the center of which a large pot shone with pristine brilliance. The reaction of the ravenous students pleased Maya immensely. It seemed to her that another minute of delay and the guys would go into shock from the increased saliva. "From what was in your refrigerator, we could only boil borscht. So, dear hosts, don't apologize for the modest table." But 4 sturdy guys were not up to etiquette, and they greedily pounced on the food. But their appetite didn't stop them from praising the girls from time to time. "Tasty, yummy, it's like home. It's been a long time since I've had such a hearty lunch. Today, we have a real belly feast." The girls were happy with the result of the action, and the guys invited them to visit. "Girls, your borscht is like the elixir of life. Come again, next time we will buy more food. Maybe you can make us some cutlets." May winked at her friend. It's true what they say that the shortest way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Today, I was convinced of that. Sandra was absorbed in her own thoughts and didn't answer. May tugged her friend's arm. "Sandra, wake up. Listen, what do you think of Fred?" "Fred who?" "The skinny, tall one." And the one with the glasses? He's okay, he's cute. I thought he was nice too. Him. Her friend's romance with the future banker spun so fast that in the summer the couple got married. The newlyweds rented an apartment and Sandra was left alone in the dormitory. But this loneliness was not long. In the fall, she entered the university on a correspondence course. Cameron also agreed that to combine study and work is the best option for a couple who are going to become a family in the near future. Only in this happy picture there was no place for Scott. The guy from afar saw a shining Sandra in the company of a childhood friend and understood everything without words. No, he didn't hold a grudge against the girl he really liked very much. But realizing that his chances were practically 0-0, he silently retreated. Then he could not suspect that many years would pass and he would play a major role in Sandra's fate. Rose was unpleasantly surprised by her daughter's decision to marry her childhood friend. But most of all, the woman was worried about Scott, who liked him very much. Sandra, have you thought this through? Cameron is a selfish man. You're gonna have a lot of grief with him. Mom, you're acting weird. Instead of wishing us happiness, you're making terrible predictions. Henry didn't interfere, but it wasn't hard to tell from his look that he wasn't thrilled about the wedding either. He decided to talk to Sandra just before the ceremony. Daughter, I just want to say one thing. Do not confuse childhood friendship with love. Are you sure Cameron feels that way about you? Of course, Dad, or he wouldn't have proposed to me. But as the emotions subsided after the wedding, Sandra began to ask herself that question more and more often. All the burdens of family life she had to pull on herself. Even more complicated life was the study. Cameron advised his young wife to drop out of university. Sandra, why bother with your brain? Sandra, why bother with your brain? You have a good profession, by the way, very useful for the family. I love your borscht and everything you make. When they arrived at the restaurant, where the event was held on the occasion of the bank's anniversary, the party was already in full swing. After a brief introduction of the guests, the chief took Cameron aside. Your wife is a real beauty. Women are the jewelry of our lives, so they need to be treated with care. Sandra felt awkward around strangers, but she was not alone for long. Suddenly, a familiar voice sounded nearby. What a surprise. How nice to see you here, Sandra. The woman hardly recognized Freddie, the lanky young man who had won the heart of her dorm mate. I didn't expect to see you here either. Cameron didn't tell me you two were working together. You're not gonna believe this, but I'm just a guest at this party. I work for a company that works closely with the bank. You don't even know, Sandra, that your husband was the lucky ticket. Everyone else in our company is more modest, although none of us have any reason to complain about life. Wait, Valerie, why are you alone? Why are you alone? Where's May? My wife is like the Flying Dutchman. You may have heard of it. May appears like a mirage and then disappears. She's currently in Italy. You may not know that my wife has her own restaurant, but that's not enough. She's got a whole chain. Something under Sandra's heart stabbed painfully. She wanted to ask Freddie something else, but Cameron returned. He nodded nonchalantly to his former classmate. Hi, we'll talk later. 3. Her husband didn't let go of Sandra's hand. Cameron, where are you dragging me? By the way, it hurts. It's okay, you'll get over it. I told you to keep a low profile. I'll find our seats and you'll wait patiently for me. The organizers refused from the traditional long table, and all the guests of the feast were seated at separate tables, in groups of 6 people, so that the participants of the feast did not get lost. Each seat was marked with a flirty nameplate. Cameron quickly found his last name. You see, it says, that's you and me. Sit down and wait. I hope I can go to the bathroom. You were being ironic. You were being ironic. Sit down. I have to talk to someone else. Her husband's behavior made the woman angry, and she could barely contain her emotions. Cameron, why all the trouble? Why did you bring me here? To make fun of me, so I could be alone, like a garden scarecrow. I'm sick of it. The man squeezed his wife's hand and hissed in her face. Imogene, me too. You better be quiet, or I won't be able to take care of myself, and I'll deal with you at home. Sandra had never seen her husband in such a state before, and his last words truly frightened her. All around her, the cheer was buzzing, toasts and congratulations were being made, but Sandra felt like a vacuum-packed walled-in person. She raised her glass together with everyone else, but barely tasted it and put it back. The woman didn't touch the food at all, but Cameron behaved very actively and almost did not sit still. He was having a blast on the stage. Sandra immediately noticed that a gorgeous blonde in a gorgeous dress of sky blue color did not leave his side. She did not pay attention to it at first, but during another dance she noticed how the strange woman pressed against her husband, and Cameron's hand at that moment was below the waist of her partner. "Well, my princesses, we'll be moving soon. We will have a large apartment in the new neighborhood." Sandra was wary. "Cameron, but where did we get that kind of money?" "Have you forgotten where your husband works?" "That's right, at the bank. I already took out a soft loan. Then we have not used the maternity capital. And I even forgot about it. We could use the extra money now. By the way, I've already paid the installment and all the necessary documents. I think you don't mind that I took care of this issue." "Sure, Cameron. I don't know anything about the law, and you're doing this for our family." "Exactly, and I'm glad you realize that. I hope you'll feed me tonight for the good news." "I'm all set. I've got the first course and the second course. If you knew how much I appreciate moments like this." "I'm a Cameron too, and I wish there were more of them." But her husband didn't hear her. He went to the bathroom to wash his hands, where his joyful voice came from. "Well, I've got more good news. I've been offered the position of head of security. Of course, I will have to go through some procedures, because it is a very responsible position." Sandra handed her husband a clean towel. "You'll do great. It's a really unusual day today. I even feel like the sun is shining brighter." All happy people feel that way. All happy people feel that way. And I'm very happy to see you happy. Cameron pulled his wife to him and kissed her hard. It was a very different kiss. It wasn't the kind of kiss he bestowed on a woman on the run to work. It was a special time for the couple. Moving into a new apartment had brought them together. Everyone in the family was fully engaged in getting their lives together. While Cameron disappeared at work, Sandra was engaged in minor repairs. Help the young family decided to help in parents. Even Lily and Lizzie tried to contribute to the common cause, but it was not always successful with the little girls. When the repair was finished, Rose wanted to talk to her daughter in the field. "Are you happy or are you trying to be?" "Mommy, have I ever lied to you? Why are you asking me? You look tired. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, and the change is very noticeable. Have I aged so much? You've gotten a little dull or something. And your eyes are confused. You look confused, and you keep averting your eyes as if you're afraid I'll read something in them." Sandra sat down on the table opposite her mother, and her condition was not hard to guess, because she nervously rubbed the fringe of the tablecloth on the table. "Mom, even if I'm not completely happy, but only trying to portray it, still nothing can change. Yes, I often catch myself thinking that I dreamed of a different life. Yes, I constantly feel like a bird in a cage and I'm aching to break free. But you realize I can't afford it. I have kids and they need a father. Cameron loves the girls, they love him." Rose cried softly. Daughter, what a life you've condemned yourself to. And it could have been different. I can't understand where your character has gone. You were so stubborn as a child and as a teenager." Sandra grinned bitterly. "Mom, you know the answers to these questions. It's my own fault for letting myself dissolve into my husband. All that's left of me is a shadow. Everything else I put on the altar of marital happiness. Perhaps I've made a strong comparison, but it's the one that best fits the situation. I don't know what to tell you, but remember, you have family to help you." "Thank you, Mom. But I still have faith that things will work out with Cameron and me." Rose said nothing. She felt in her heart that this way her daughter is trying to hold on to the last hope, which is about to disappear forever, like a star in the morning sky. If the first years of married life Cameron still sometimes heard the voice of conscience after moving into a new apartment, he stopped listening to it. He felt himself the master of life, and on anyone who disagreed with this distribution of roles. There was a lot of pressure on his part. Of course, it was Sandra who was getting the brunt of it, although the woman had recently completely lost the ability to resist. But strangely enough, it was this blind obedience that threw the man off balance, and he had to make a great effort not to spill his irritation on his wife in public during the corporate party. "I'm sorry, but I have to go." Sandra went to the ladies' room to wash her hands, but noticed in a dark corner near the closet a couple hidden from prying eyes. The men and women were seated comfortably in chairs, but she recognized Cameron immediately from his voice. "But bear with me a little longer, now is not the time to change things." In response, a woman whispered hotly, "Cameron, I've been patient for 3 years. Believe me, I can't have that old man around me. I'm sick of hiding, these secret dates and all. Jules, believe me, I want to be with you too. Yes, I've wanted to for a long time, but if your husband found out about our meetings, he'd bury me alive in the ground." The blonde laughed softly. "He has long known everything, but always forgives me a little pranks." "Why?" "Because. Sorry, this is a very sensitive subject. Let's get out of here and go to our nest." "I can't. I'll be right back. My wife's there." "I can't. Wait till tomorrow." Sandra didn't wait for the end of the conversation and went back to the hall unnoticed by the lovers. There was an open terrace in the restaurant where the drunken crowd was having fun. No one paid attention to Sandra and she slipped outside. The light breeze cooled her down a bit and she began to think about her next steps. But all the plans were too bold for her to realize. "Nothing. I'll tell him what I think tonight." The girls were already asleep and Sandra thanked her neighbor, who sometimes kindly agreed to look after the little naughty girls. A large cash bill quickly disappeared into the folds of the elderly lady's clothes. "Sandra, thank you. By God, it cost me nothing to do you a favor. All the more I am pleased to do it, because your little girls are very obedient girls. Most kids today are spoiled, but your little girls are always obedient and polite. And little Lily even calls me grandma. It's so nice." The neighbor was set for a long dialogue, so Sandra had to say goodbye to her. "Yes, your help is invaluable and we will definitely turn to you and my husband if the girls have no one to leave them with." The door of the neighboring apartment slammed shut and the woman breathed a sigh of relief. But no sooner had she gone into the nursery to admire her sleeping daughters than footsteps sounded near the door. Sandra immediately guessed that it was her husband, and the sound of his footsteps did not bode well for her. Finding his wife in the hallway, Cameron gave her an angry look. "Why did you leave? Why did you leave? I was sick of watching this feast of mockery. You could have warned me. You could have warned me. You could have, but you didn't want to." "Yes, I did. How are you talking to me? Cameron, I'm not your subject or your serf. I'm sick of this. I'd had enough of being ruled by you." "Duh, you?" The man didn't take his eyes off his wife, which didn't promise a quiet evening either. "Since when did you become so independent? Why so bold?" "Because I saw you making nice with the chief's wife with mine own eyes." "Ah, you were following me. Okay, you want the truth? You can have it. I have no choice but to see my male needs on the side. Because you're like an Egyptian mummy in bed. You're no good and your borscht and cutlets are getting on my nerves." Offensive words of her husband slapped her face. A thick lump rolled up to her throat and Sandra felt that she was choking. "Cameron, but you're taking it out on me. Are you a brainless sheep to blindly obey my every word?" "But I thought, and I thought, this conversation is over. It's a good thing you found out today. The end of our family drama was inevitable anyway. Go make your borscht somewhere else, although you can stay here as a housewife." Cameron laughed evilly in her face. "Think about that option. I hope I've made myself clear." "Yes, except for one little thing. You forgot about the children." The man wrinkled his nose as if he had a sudden toothache. "You can stay in my apartment for the time being, but I don't have time to babysit my daughters, even though I love them very much." Cameron disappeared behind the bedroom door, but reappeared a moment later. He tossed a pillow onto the living room couch. "You'll sleep here tonight. This is your punishment for disobedience." That night, Sandra didn't sleep a wink. She scrolled through the chronicles of yesterday, remembered the beginning of their family life, but never realized when the process of destruction was started. She no longer doubted that her softness was to blame. In the morning, Cameron, as if nothing had happened, he got up at the usual time and said in a cheerful voice, "Wife, where is my breakfast?" Sandra, too, rushed into the kitchen out of inertia. It took her only a couple of minutes to prepare an omelet with grated cheese. Her husband loved that dish. To avoid facing her abuser, Sandra closed herself in the bathroom and turned on the shower. Through the sound of the water, she heard the front door slam. On the kitchen table was a piece of paper on which her husband's hand had written a few words. "I'll be late. You don't have to cook dinner." Sandra's eyes went black. Trying not to wake the girls, she began to take out her anger on anything that came to hand. "Thank you, master, for letting me not cook you dinner. It's a good thing you're late, because you're better off with that blonde than your wife. She doesn't stink of borscht like I do," Sandra half whispered, taking out her years of anger on milk cartons, canned peas, apples, and cabbage. She used a knife to shred the food with a kind of ferocity and then sent it into the garbage can. The splatters flew in different directions and soon colored juicy rivulets flowed from the walls. As she let off the steam, the woman was pleased with her work. "That's great. Now I have to do the same for everything that gets in my way. As my mommy likes to say, it's the beginning." Rose understood without words when she saw her daughter and her granddaughters on the doorstep. Sandra's eyes were burning, and her demeanor showed that she was excited. "Meet the guests." "Of course, my precious ones. Come in. Husband, look who's here." Henry kissed his daughter and granddaughters. The girls immediately began to pester their grandfather with questions. "Will we have our own room, Grandpa? Will you buy us toys?" "Of course, you'll have everything. In Grandma and Grandpa's house, you can even walk on your head." The girls squealed with delight and immediately began to carry out Grandpa's instructions. Rose helped with the packing. "Sandra, are you here for good?" "Yes, I thought I'd take your advice and start from scratch. You know how builders have an expression for zero cycle, and in my life, it so happened that yesterday I destroyed an old building. Even the foundation was torn apart. Now I have to build it all over again. But I'm not afraid, even though I know it's gonna be hard. It was right to leave him. Cameron will be lost without you. Mom, he found a replacement for me a long time ago. I don't think there's another woman like you in the world. No woman would put up with an asshole like Cameron. But don't worry, you won't be lost with us. And we'll help you find a job. I've got some ideas about that." "That's interesting. Let's see what you got in mind, Mommy." "Remember Lindsay Stark? Remember our town's first cooperator? She's in desperate need of employees. She's not doing so well. She's got a lot of loans, and her bar is barely making a profit. She thinks it's a loss." The next day, Sandra was already on the staff of a local diner. The diner, which owned Lindsay, was located in the bus station. But the establishment had a bad reputation in the town because they're from early morning to evening crowded fans of foamy drink. The owner was happy to see Sandra. "Oh, thank you, Sandra. Everyone's running away from me. I don't like the conditions. You'd think I'd be satisfied with these skewed faces, come at noon and dawn and beg for a loan to let them go, and then forget." Words-willing woman laid out all the nuances of work in an institution of this type. But Sandra was not frightened by the difficulties. A few weeks she studied the peculiarities of the work, and then said to the hostess, "And why did not you sell baked goods? You could even organize a hot meal here, because at the bus station there is such a flow of passengers." Lindsay looked at the new employee with a condescending glance. "You have a Barbarossa plan. Sure, it looks good from the outside. But what do I get out of the pies and salads? Believe me, a lot more than I make selling beer. Look, I've done some calculations." Sandra handed the landlady a notebook full of figures. She asked in surprise, "Are you familiar with this business?" "Not much. 2 years of college, then the same number of years at the university. I wanted to become an economist, but it didn't work out. But I still managed to get some useful knowledge." That evening, a satisfied Lindsay beckoned Sandra into the back room. "I've been studying your Checkist notes." "Why do I say that?" "Because those numbers look like a cipher, like they do in the spy movies. Of course, I don't understand this science very well, but I trust you. My situation is dire. I need to fix it now." "I totally agree. But tell me, where are we gonna do all of this?" "It's going to require additional staff and space." Sandra began to explain her plan. "We'll rent the space. Yes, we'll need extra money, but we can rent the shop by the hour at the restaurant. I already checked, it won't cost much. I know about your difficulties, and I can take the loan on myself, and the staff do not need to hire yet. I'm a college graduate, and I even have experience working in a cafe in the capital." The hostess looked at Sandra as if mesmerized, and then enclosed her in the vise of her embrace. "You are my salvation." The woman was so emotional that she couldn't hold back her tears. "I had already stopped believing in goodness. But it turns out that there are still people who are ready to give a shoulder. Sandra, God sent you to me. Although not everything went smoothly at first, especially annoying bureaucratic obstacles, Sandra believed in success. One evening, Henry remarked, "Mother, I've been admiring our daughter these days. In a good way, of course." The young woman laughed. "Dad, that word always has a good meaning. But I had no idea that my person could delight." Rose supported her spouse. "And you do not laugh at your father. I completely agree with him. You really, after you threw your banker, became like a man, blossomed, prettier, in the eyes of a light burning." "Dad, you've praised me so much. Aren't you afraid that I'll become conceited?" "No, that's not typical of you. When you were a child, you fought for the truth, defended the weak, and it's nice to see the old Sandra now. So go ahead, my daughter, you might start your own business." This phrase, accidentally said by her father, is firmly planted in the brain of the innovator. Previously, she never thought that she could run her own business. It was because of insecurity. But the first 6 months on Aunt Lindsay's job had shown her that it could be a real challenge. Later on, the owner of the place herself began to speak openly about it. "Sandra, you can't be a backroom girl. I still can't believe that my beer hall has turned into a respectable establishment." The drunks, of course, are not happy about the change, but their opinion is the least of my concern. But the moms with their kids are coming in, and old grannies like to shop here. But what I like best is the name Aunt Lindsay's Pie Shop. It's succinct and beautiful. The owner did not exaggerate Sandra's merits. Indeed, without her help, it would have been impossible to do such a job in such a short period of time. Sandra was already treating the establishment as her own brainchild. The initiative woman became known in the region, and one day a newspaper correspondent came to them right in the middle of the working day. He clicked his camera and asked a lot of questions, and at the end of the conversation he asked, "Sandra, why don't you open your own business?" She thought for a long time and then honestly answered, "Over the past year my life has changed so abruptly that I do not have time to turn over the chips. I just hadn't given the question much thought." Just a few days later, Lindsay showed up at the pie shop in high spirits. "You guys won't believe this, but I'm getting married. If anyone thinks that at my age, it's a shame to organize a personal life and she's serious, it should be done without regard to the years. I've been so lucky for the first time in my life." The staff, and it was mostly women of different ages, ahahal and ahahal. And the cleaning lady even said in her heart, "People, if someone's got a shot at Lindsay, maybe I'll get one. I'm like that model on the runway." The woman walked through the hall, wiggling her hips and waving a mop. Everyone laughed heartily at the colorful number of the cleaner, but it was an ostentatious laugh. "What's going to happen to us now? Lindsay, if you leave us, I don't think the new owner will want to keep us." Girls, don't get discouraged. You're not going to get discouraged. I assure you that you won't end up on the streets because your new owner will be Sandra. So please love and welcome. It was so unexpected for everyone that the spacious room was so silent that the hum of the refrigerator seemed like the roar of an airplane. But it was Sandra who was most shocked. She tried to object to the hostess, but she invited her into her office with her signature gesture. "I wanted to surprise you so much, and I think I succeeded. Sandra, your jaw dropped down in amusement when I announced my decision in front of our team." The woman was used to the fact that her hostess's vocabulary consisted mostly of phrases not used in literature. What struck her most was the tone with which she was now uttering them. Lindsay's whole being was imbued with sadness. "You wouldn't believe, Sandra, how my heart is torn to pieces. I've grown attached to this town and my bar. I'm sorry, but I can't let this last chance slip away either. You want to be happy at any age, and I met a decent man. Maybe we'll make a model family with him. It's a pity that my darling lives in the far north, but my son has settled there. So if things don't work out with my new husband, I'll live out my life with my son. Of course, Aunt Lindsay, you'll do fine. But you could sell your business for a profit." "I could, but I can't trust my business to just anyone." "Yes, I can, and you're the one person I have 200% confidence in. I'll do my best to justify your trust, and I hope you'll come visit us." It took a few days to finalize the legal details. According to the terms of the deal, Sandra had to pay her former landlady an almost symbolic sum. "You've done a good deed for me, and I'd like to repay you in kind. After all, Not everything in this world is measured in money. I really want things to get better for you." Lindsay sincerely wished the log success, and the words of this kindest woman were heard in heaven. Becoming a full-fledged owner of the pie shop, Sandra began to plan the expansion of the business, and soon she bought a small restaurant, which was located near the pie shop. The more successful Sandra's business went, the more friends she made. Mostly they were men who sought to win the favor of a single woman. Of course, some were annoyed by the success of the businesswoman. The list of bitter enemies of the woman turned out to be in the parents of her ex-husband. When Sandra disappeared with the children, Cameron believed that she would return. "Nothing will crawl to my feet and will still be begging like alms that I took her back. My wife is not adapted to an independent life. She cannot do anything, and with her education, she punched only in what a diner to get a job." Such predictions Cameron gave in the company of friends on rare outings in nature. With the wife of the boss, he did not get involved from purely scurny motives, but Sandra's place was quickly taken by a young employee of his bank. The man kept in touch with her parents, so he was aware of the case of his runaway wife. When he learned that she had taken a job in a bar, his joy knew no bounds. "I told you I wouldn't be surprised if she married a farmer or a chauffeur." Cameron's celebration was short-lived. Sandra filed for divorce and alimony. It was a turn he certainly hadn't expected. In a burst of emotion, he dialed his wife's number, but she abruptly cut off the flow of his swear words. "Cameron, now you and I are going to settle everything through the courts. Oh, I almost forgot. The apartment was not only bought with your money. In case you haven't forgotten, there's maternity capital, so your daughter has every right to a part of the capital's living space. I hope you won't dispute that fact." The banker was unpleasantly surprised by this news. But then from his parents began to come in quite stunning information. When he learned that Sandra, in addition to the pie shop, bought a restaurant, he had a fit of rage. Where did that miserable woman get the money from? She couldn't buy anything without my permission, and here's a whole restaurant. There's only one way to do that. The old way. But it works. I'm going to break the horns of that benefactor who's sponsoring my wife. While saying this monologue, Cameron forgot that Sandra is no longer legally his wife. The woman herself did not even guess what plans of revenge nurtured her former spouse. She tried not to think of him, and if the past inadvertently broke into dreams, she woke up in a cold sweat. The girls also rarely remembered their father. The eldest went to school and Lily went to kindergarten. That year, winter began suddenly. It had been drizzling rain since the evening, and in the morning it was freezing, and by lunchtime it began to snow. In a matter of hours, huge drifts grew in the streets. Sandra stayed late at the restaurant and hurried home, but for some reason she felt uneasy. Someone invisible whispered to her that she should check out the pie shop. To cheer herself up, the woman said out loud, "It's not far, only 200 meters. I'll go check it out just in case. God forbid there's a short circuit or something." Gusts of wind blew in her face, and Sandra had to walk the short distance for half an hour. But as soon as she reached her destination, a new surprise awaited her. She saw a human figure on a bench, almost completely covered in snow. It was a man, and he reeked of booze. "My God, he's going to freeze. You can't drink yourself into oblivion." She began to shake the man, who didn't look like the local drinkers. The man was wearing an expensive coat and a branded pair of shoes, and the unpleasant odor of unexpectedly, the latter answered, and in a faltering tongue, "Nothing. And who?" "For your information, I came by cab because I wanted to find the little person here." "Where'd you get so drunk, Scott? Do you even recognize me?" The man took a long look at her face and then sobered up. "Sandra, I've been looking for you, but I've been very well received here." Scott struggled to get up from the bench and looked around in surprise too. "It turns out that while I was asleep, winter started. Am I an ant or a dragonfly?" Sandra laughed. "We'll figure it out later. Be thankful I found you. You'd have frozen to death on that bench before morning." Rose was somehow not surprised to see Sandra in the company of a frozen Scott. "Oh, what's going on? I didn't mean for this to happen." "And here, Mom, please be a little more specific." "Daughter, don't swear at me, but Scott called me, and when he heard you divorced Cameron, he decided to come over. His life's not going well either. He'll tell you all about it later." Rose rushed to rescue the frozen guest, and Sandra couldn't help but marvel at her mother's resourcefulness. It wasn't until the next day that she was able to have a normal conversation with Scott. Not only was he freezing outside, but he was feeling very ill. One thing Sandra realized for sure, Scott had simply fallen in love with this hospitable town with equally hospitable residents. They were the ones who had gotten him so pumped up, albeit at his expense, but that didn't matter. After a hot soup and a mug of strong tea, the man was sweltering. Sandra spread him out on the couch and covered him with a blanket. Rose sighed. Such a good man and so unlucky in life. Mom, what's wrong with him? I can't believe that you've been talking to him for so long you don't know anything about him. The woman waved her hand. I do, but I don't know the details. Mom, Scott got married, started his own business, a lucrative one, some kind of restaurant or cafe. And when things got good, his wife left him and left him without a business. Don't think he doesn't drink. It's just something came over him, but he said he's not gonna give up. Starting from scratch means starting from scratch. Mom, you're so worried about him. Sandra, come on. You know Scott's a good man, and if he just… Mom, I'm not saying anything. How's work going? Sandra sat down tiredly. You know, I can't say it's bad, but… Mom. Her mother sat down in front of her. It's like there's something missing, like a twist, or I'm missing a detail that's right in front of my nose. Sandra, I feel like you're missing something. Sandra, I think you're being too picky. Sandra, in such a short time, your restaurant has become one of the best in the city. Sandra put her thumb up. That's right, Mom. One of the best, and I want the best. Rose smiled, recognizing my daughter, and you know what I'll tell you. If you want it, you're bound to get it. I know you. Thank you, Mommy. I'm going to bed. I want to get up early tomorrow. The cook has a grandson. She's taking the day off. Okay, go to bed. Good. From the doorstep, Sandra turned around. Mommy, how are the girls? I must be a bad mom. The girls are fine. Don't worry. And you're a good mother. It's just hard for you now, all alone, and my father and I don't understand anything about it to help. Sandra hugged her mother in a rush of feeling. What would I do without you? Early in the morning, she kissed the sleeping girls and ran off to the restaurant. There was a lot to do, and soon she forgot about everything. Cameron threw his shirt in his new girlfriend's face with annoyance. I don't understand. Is it so hard to throw the shirts in the machine and just iron them? The girl calmly threw the shirt on the floor and continued to put on her makeup. Finally, she pulled herself away from the mirror. Probably not. Cameron was furious. Of course not. Then I don't understand why you won't do it yourself. Then I don't understand why you won't do it. He choked with rage. Me? I have to wash my own shirts? Not me. In fact, I've been thinking. I'm not happy with all this. Cameron watched with huge eyes as the girl quickly threw her things into her bag and sent him a kiss. This just could be happening. How could it be? Someone out there and just take off on him like that? No, it was all Sandra's fault. She was the first one who dared to do something different from what he wanted. Cameron found a clean shirt in the depths of his closet with great difficulty and exhaled a sigh of relief. It had probably been ironed by Sandra, and then he was so furious. He should be suffering here, and this is a little businesswoman. It would be ridiculous if she, an illiterate fool, this business also brings money. Though her mother said Sandra had blossomed and the girls were well dressed, Cameron didn't want to believe that for some reason. He was absolutely sure that if he called Sandra, she would immediately come crawling back on her knees. Except that wasn't the plan either. She would have to crawl over and apologize, and he would forgive, of course. But not right away, and he'd have to make some rules for her. Cameron fancied himself thinking up rules, but then he shook himself. You might not even make it to work on time. As soon as he got to the bank, he was called in to see the chief. Cameron was surprised and even grimaced. He didn't really want to talk to the man who was the husband of his, albeit former mistress, but there was nothing to be done. For now, Cameron was still a servile man, though he had Napoleonic plans. May I? Come in, Cameron. Cameron went to the table and only now saw that at the table in the corner of the office sits Jewel and smiled at him. It gave Cameron a chill. She's just what he needed. It wasn't a pretty breakup, or rather, it wasn't pretty. Cameron's head was already spinning. He just found out that Sandra had filed for divorce, and then there was Jules. Well, it's a dream come true. I can move in with you. Cameron was dumbfounded. Cameron looked at her dumbfounded. You mean you're going to leave your husband? Of course I am, honey. We've talked about this so many times. He wrinkled his nose like a toothache. It's true what they say, beauty and brains are incompatible. And you're going to work? Jewel fluttered her eyelashes in surprise. Why? Well, I doubt that your money bag will give you a generous parting gift, but for me to stay where I am is out of the question. Jewel stared at him for a while, then said, So you don't want me in your life? Jules, think about it. But Lisa was already carried away. She screamed so that Cameron grabbed his head and just pushed her out of the apartment. To be honest, at first he was very worried. She'd complained to her husband and then what? But it didn't seem to bother him. Now, watching her in the chair, he realized it's nothing like that. People like her don't forgive. Cameron, I have an offer you can't refuse. Cameron tensed up. I'm listening. We need to help our office. It's not that far away, only 300 kilometers from Chicago. Cameron snowed. That's it. They're gonna send him to some shithole and forget him. Don't worry, it's only for a few months, and then you can go back to your job. Cameron realized he had no choice, so he waved his head doomfully. But the surprises didn't end there. He stayed there for almost 6 months, coming to the apartment on weekends, sleeping it off, scrubbing up because hot water outages were the norm where he was forced to be. He knew that some young employee was temporarily performing his duties and was sure that he would fail him in all his work. But he was wrong. The young employee not only did not screw up his work, but made some adjustments that were to the liking of his boss. Anyway, when Cameron came back, he was given a handshake. I'm sorry, Cameron, but your successor is doing a much better job than you are. Sorry, Cameron. What am I supposed to do? You promised me I'd get my job back. You don't think I'd put you back in your position at the expense of the bank? You can't. You can go back to your old position or look for another one if you don't like it. Cameron wrote his letter of resignation in full confidence that he would be fired, but of course that didn't happen. He blamed Sandra for everything, absolutely everything. He had a thought in his head that he should go and see how she was doing, especially since he had children there. Cameron liked that thought. He even called his mother. Oh, Cameron, I don't know if you should come. Sandra's doing very well. I don't think you'd like it. What do you mean she's doing very well? Tell me her diner is making a good profit. Cameron laughed, but his mother didn't cheer him up. She's got more than one restaurant now. I know she's got one in the next town over. Cameron choked on his saliva. Mom, does she have a rich patron there? Somebody's got to tell a fool what to do. Mom didn't even get a chance to say a word before Cameron threw him out. It doesn't matter though. It's time to visit his daughters and his wife. To look her in the eye. She's been on my payroll for years, and now look at her. He didn't say anything else. He just hung up the phone. Sandra. Cameron suddenly turned around. What does he have in his life? Nothing. Not even a position stripped from him. Not even any of the ladies around him. Of course, as he was on the horse, so interesting to everyone, and as a little fell down, so all passed by and pretend not to know. Sandra was so busy that day that she forgot all about Scott, but he didn't forget about her. He came to her restaurant at lunchtime. Can I sit here in the corner? Sandra smiled. Sit, of course, if it's not boring. I don't have a chef's banquet today, so I have to get around. Scott resolutely took off his jacket. Do you have anything to change into? Sandra looked at him in amazement. God, I'd forgotten you were the best chef ever. Scott frowned modestly. Well, I guess you're exaggerating, but I can do some things. In the evening, tired and both happy, they accepted praise from the visiting guests. One of them approached them when everyone was leaving. I live in another city, but I really liked it here. What if I invite your team to my mansion? Everything to prepare for an anniversary for about 100 people. As you can imagine, money is not a problem at all. Scott and Sandra looked at each other, and the woman immediately thought that it would be immediately you can buy a new oven, many other things. After a couple weeks, Sandra decided that it was necessary to ask Scott after all, what their plans for the future were. Sandra, I don't know what to say. Let's talk like adults. Sandra blushed for some reason. Rose immediately rushed off to do something important. Okay, let's. She realized that talking at work wouldn't stop everything, but she was ready. Every day, Sandra realized more and more what mistakes she had made. Scott had once been the complete opposite of Cameron. Lily and Lizzie were literally never far from him when he was at home. If they never even tried to approach their father with their problems, then Scott was approached without any shyness. Sandra, you know there's a reason I called your mom. I didn't just come here when I found out you left your husband. I realized that. I wish I'd told you right away so I wouldn't be dragged down by reticence. When I saw you, I realized that nothing's ever really gone at all. I still want to look at you and admire you. You know, maybe it's for the best that there's nothing holding me there anymore. I'd like to start all over again from when you and I first met. Sandra stood up, walked over to the window. I don't know what to say to you right now. Scott jumped up. There's no need to say anything right now. Let things be the way they are. I'm not asking for an answer. It'll come to me. And about everything else, I'd love to work at your restaurant. Sandra approached him a couple months later. Scott, he understood. He put his arm around her. I'll make you and the girls happy, I promise. Cameron continued to look for work. The money was disappearing at a disastrous rate. Now he didn't understand how Sandra managed to run the house on the money he was giving her. No, he wasn't a cheapskate. At the time, it had seemed to him that he was giving away very substantial sums of money, but now he realized that in order to live normally, one had to dodge somehow, and he had long since gotten used to such things. At last his luck turned to him, but not with his face. He was offered a job as a small clerk in a bank. Do you even know what position I was working in? Of course. Of course, that's why we made it easy for you. If you don't like it, you can keep looking. You have to understand, a bank is not the same as a bank. And it is one thing when a young, inexperienced employee comes and we will invest in him what we need, or a person who is used to work in a different way comes to us. It's very difficult to retrain. He had no choice but to accept. At least he had time to pay the rent. Then he remembered that the apartment was part of the court-granted share to Sandra and the girls, and that Sandra could claim her share at any time. Of course, he didn't believe that. But his mom had told him some strange things about his ex-wife. Towards summer, he finally got ready to go back to his hometown. He didn't know why he was going, whether to visit his mother or to see Sandra. The fact that he had children there, Cameron remembered only in conversation with colleagues. All the way there, he made plans, how he'd take her down morally. Obviously, for a town this size, any diner is good. Of course, he would gladly rub her face in all the flaws. As luck would have it, his way ran through the square, where the restaurant was renovated. Money was tight, though Cameron wasn't going to pay. Would Sandra have the conscience to take money from someone who fed and clothed her for so many years? He parked, looked around. It was a good location, not far from the movie theater, the park. The traffic was good. I wondered if Sandra really did it. Cameron's teeth chattered and he clenched his fists. But you'll regret it? You'll regret it, won't you? He pushed the door open with determination. Sandra, the vegetables are here. They're bad. Mark doesn't want to sign that they're bad. And Sandra raised her hand. Okay, Lee, be quiet. Lena was the new manager at the restaurant. A young girl, smart, with a personality. There was only one flaw. As soon as she got nervous, she'd rant so loud that no one could stop her but Sandra. Calm down, I'll go and talk to Mark. Oh, Sandra. Oh, Sandra, if only Scott were here, he'd give him a hard time. But you know Scott's out getting new furniture for the banquet room. I know, I can't wait till he gets here. Sandra was hurt on one hand that so much hope was pinned on Scott, as if she didn't mean anything anymore. But on the other hand, it was a very good thing. She would have to leave the restaurant for a while, and this way, she would be completely at ease. Scott would be able to handle it at all. The woman rose heavily from the table. She was still 2 months away from giving birth, and she could barely walk. She felt better when she was carrying the girls. Maybe she was younger. Maybe it was the girls. Mark saw her, and it snowballed. But what man could argue with a pregnant woman like that? He sighed sadly, signed some paper. Mark, you promised me that my restaurant would only serve the freshest food. Where am I going to get the freshest? Where am I going to get the freshest? And where am I going to put the old stuff? But we're paying you well, above market price. What? just for you to bring us fresh ones. Yes, I remember, but I have to try and sell my products. I'll send my son in an hour. He'll bring another. Sandra smiled. But what can you do with him? All the time he needs an eye and an eye. She returned to the office, just wanted to sit down, but immediately in the office again appeared Leah. Sandra, what now? There's a visitor demanding to see you, at the table behind the curtain. What's going on in there? Lee shrugged. I don't know. He seemed happy. At least it's all eaten. God, what a day today. Sandra went into the hall. She'd had a headache all morning. The girls at home had the flu. It looked like she wanted to be sick, and she couldn't be sick. She has a son who won't like it. Sandra stroked her stomach, smiled, remembered how Scott had reacted to the news that they were having a baby. For a while he stood there just looking at her. Then he knelt down and pressed his face against her belly. I thought I'd never hear words like that again, even somehow made peace with it. Thank you. She walked down the hall, climbed the 3 steps, and froze. Cameron was sitting in front of her, smirking. Something was beginning to stir in her soul that made her bend her shoulders and pull her head in. But Sandra quickly came to her senses. That's all I need. She doesn't depend on him, and Cameron is nothing to her. Cameron, what are you doing here? I just came to see what uneducated gray women are up to these days. He saw her belly. He saw her belly. He grinned wider. What didn't you calculate while you were courting your virtues? Sandra felt nausea coming up her throat. This has nothing to do with you. Why did you call me? You've changed. You've gotten meaner. You've learned to growl back. Cameron, I don't have much time. He's up. That's how it is. You used to have all the time in the world for me. Then tell me, what did you like about it? The truth? You ran away from the truth? But what you really are is you're a dumb, ugly little bitch, and you're nothing in bed. I don't know what you're offended by. The nausea stopped unbearable, but Sandra smiled in response to the words of her ex-husband. It seemed to be, or in your words, squeaks envy. Have you seen yourself, Cameron? The shirt is not fresh. The pants have blisters on the knees. Maybe some people wouldn't notice, but not me. What about your perfection? You're always perfect. But you're surrounded by dorks, or maybe you're not so cool anymore. She wanted to leave, but Cameron grabbed her arm hard and painfully. Where? I haven't told you to go yet. Let go, it hurts. Sandra jerked her hand away sharply, and Cameron brought his face closer to her. It seems to me that you owe me a lot of things. Cameron, let me go, do you hear me? You're nothing to me. You have no right. He squinted angrily and abruptly let go of Sandra. She couldn't hold on to the top step and flew screaming downwards. The height wasn't much, but here was her position. Sandra fell right at the feet of her husband, who came and went looking for her. Sandra. The man knelt down on his knees. An ambulance quickly. The staff ran towards him as well, and Scott raised a heavy look at Cameron. It's you. Cameron backed away. He knew the man from somewhere, he just didn't understand where yet. Cameron realized he had to run. He better hide now. He didn't have time. Scott's fist met him on the last step. You're gonna answer for this. You're gonna answer for everything. He ran out of the restaurant, but no one chased him. Sandra fell into the darkness, then floated out of it. Her stomach ached so intolerably that she wanted to scream. Patience, my dear, a little patience. Rose took the girls. Henry said he would meet his ex-brother-in-law properly. He said he had the strength to get him down the stairs. Sandra smiled weakly. Daddy can. The pain pierced her whole body again. Be patient, dear, we're here now. Someone was talking over her. Then she was being wheeled somewhere. She felt a prick in her arm and immediately felt very light. Sandra closed her eyes. Scott was out of breath. He paced back and forth in the hallway until an orderly yelled at him. But why are you walking like a pendulum? Does that make you feel better? It doesn't, and you won't let me mop the floors. He looked at the old woman in confusion. I'm sorry, and sat down. She came up to him. Wife? Yes. Don't worry. We have very good doctors. Thank you. The phone rang in my pocket. Yes, it was Rose. Scott, how's Sandra? The woman was crying. I don't know anything yet. She's in surgery. Scott, that bastard Cameron, he set fire to the pie shop. How? Well, they caught him. but they couldn't save the pie shop. No one was hurt. No, it was nothing. Scott, you call me as soon as you know anything. Okay. He just disconnected the call when the doctor appeared at the door. Scott stood up and stared at him in silence. But why are you staring at me like that? You should be watching your wife. 15 minutes later, and you wouldn't have saved her. You've got a kid. Premature, of course, but he's strong. He'll gain weight quickly, so don't worry. Scott exhaled noisily, and Sandra will be fine, but you won't be able to have children. We have 3. Well, that's good. Scott suddenly stepped toward the doctor. Thank you. Thank you. He hugged him, then grabbed Rose's cell phone. Baby, it's okay. Sandra's fine too. And we're gonna build a new pie shop that's way cooler than the first one. Sandra opened her eyes and immediately remembered what had happened. She put her hand to her stomach and froze in horror. Immediately, her husband's smiling face appeared above her. Don't worry, everything is fine. Our son is alive and will soon be perfectly healthy. Scott, Sandra, he took her hand in his. When I realized that I could have lost you, I immediately thought that I don't need anything here without you. What's my point? I love you so much that I didn't even know it. Sandra smiled. I love you too. They were not discharged until a month later. Sandra was a little nervous. Scott had only been around for a few minutes lately and then ran off somewhere else. She couldn't figure out what was wrong. Then this morning she saw on the news that her pie shop had burned down a month ago. She was furious. Why hadn't he said anything? But she'd give him a hard time at home. They were driving down some strange road. Why are we driving here? I want to show you something. It's not the remains of a pie shop. Scott turned to her. How long have you known? This morning. I just didn't want to worry you. The car stopped. They were standing in the square, her restaurant visible just a little in the distance, and next to them a small building with a nice sign that read Pastry Shop by Lizzie's. As you realize on the other side of town, Pastry Shop at Lizzie's, Sandra felt tears forming in her eyes. Scott hugged her. Am I forgiven? Sandra snuggled into his chest. Why was I such a fool not to marry you in the first place? Why? We'd all make mistakes in life, but if we don't hurry up, it'll be our last. Rose is going to kill us because she was almost up all night cooking and the girls were helping her. Sandra laughed, looking at her son who was sleeping sweetly. Yes, we have to go because our grandmother is strict. A week after their return, there was an opening of the pastry shops. Sandra was nervous, but Scott was completely calm. He now knew that nothing would ever destroy the happiness of their large and strong family. And on top of that, he brought 2 pastry chefs from the capital. He had forgotten to tell the line about it, and now he was afraid. Just a few days ago, there was a trial. Cameron confusedly said that it was his ex-wife who brought him to such a state. He explained that she had taken away his good fortune and in fact she should be tried, and Sandra suddenly stood up. I want to drop the lawsuit. I want him to live free. Scott only then did Scott realize how much Sandra had punished Cameron. At first, he didn't understand such an impulse, and when Cameron stopped beside them and said, So you uncouth redneck, made it so I owe you now? I hate you. Scott stood up and Cameron quickly headed for the door. Scott looked at Sandra. She finally smiled. Well, let him suffer a little. He won't be around much longer anyway. Scott laughed. You are a dangerous woman. Sandra smiled back. I'm just the most loving and loving.